Ritter became a household name around the world in the early 90s when he, a former United States Marine Corps intelligence officer and United Nations weapon inspector, declared definitively that there were no weapons of mass destruction to be found in Iraq. There was no need to invade Iraq. If the United States, George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld had listened to Scott Ritter, the lives of hundreds of thousands of people could have been saved, and the destruction of Iraq could have been avoided. But nobody listened. Fast forward 30 years later, and here we are. We are at it again, this time in Ukraine, in a war that the same Scott Ritter claims today could have been avoided, if only we had listened. Scott Ritter, welcome to this program.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Let me just say before I start with my question, Scott, that's one hell of a thing to actually think about, that if they had listened, and I watched the other day on YouTube a video where I saw Joe Biden really hitting you on this. I think referring to you as something like, this is above your pay grade, laddie, or something like that. Quite disgusting. But that's something, that's a really big thing to think that if they had listened to you then, we could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Is it something that's in your mind as well, that you think about sometimes as well?
Well, it is a sensitive topic because that's a hell of a responsibility to throw on somebody's shoulders. And the fact is, I put it on my own shoulders. The reason why I spoke out was to avoid a war that I knew was going to be costly, a war that I knew would cost the lives of my fellow Marines, who I place above all else, to be honest. But also, Iraqi civilians whom I had come to know over the course of the past, 7 years of work in Iraq, watching them suffer under sanctions, knowing that we inspectors held the key to their well-being in our hands, and frustrated that the Iraqi government and, my government and the Security Council couldn't find it within them to allow the inspection process to be completed. I mean, we were stopped by the United States because they didn't want disarmament. They wanted to eliminate Saddam Hussein, and we were blocked by Saddam Hussein because they recognized that the United States was using the inspections to spy, not disarm. And we inspectors, who were simply trying to do our job, and we did our job, we're caught in the middle. If I think about that too long, I mean, then the next question is, why did I fail? Was it my fault that I failed? Was it, that I didn't present the argument well enough? Was I too aggressive? And the moment you go down that path, you can fall into a deep funk and a deep depression. So I try not to reflect on. I'm proud of the fact. I'm proud of the stance I took. Very proud of the stance I took. But I don't think the world has any clue kind of toll it took on me or my family. And I oftentimes have the conversation with my wife, would I have done it differently knowing what I know now? And the answer is, I don't know. And that's a horrible answer, because the answer should be, no, I wouldn't do anything differently. But then I take a look at what it's cost, and I say, and then I also look at the fact that no one was willing to listen. So what was the point? To be right, to be vindicated, to say I was right? It didn't save any lives, and it didn't do me any good being right, other than to be able to look myself in the mirror every morning and say, yeah, I'm pretty happy with the guy that's looking back. It was a hell of a thing. I have to tell you, one of the moments of greatest depression was when I was in the airport coming back from California. I just spoken at a university, again, trying to talk about weapons of mass destruction, and looking up on the screen and seeing that the Marines had gone across the border. That was in March. And it just right there, it just hit me that everything I had done for the last several years, speaking out against this, was all for naught. It was a wasted effort, because from that moment on, there wasn't going to be peace. And everything that I was trying to achieve was never going to happen.
Yeah.
So you just reflect on, wasted effort, wasted years, sacrifice made by family and friends, and now knowing that thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people's lives will be forever changed, either
Yeah.
terminated, crippled physically, crippled mentally. No one talks about that, by the way.
Hmm.
Or crippled emotionally, crippled economically. Generations of children condemned to be raised under the specter of conflict. Yeah, yeah, I'm getting depressed talking about it. So
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
move on.
I
Yeah.
can imagine it must have been a very painful process and period for you. In fact, you'll see in this discussion that I am thankful to have with you today. That's very much part of my theme in this discussion is if only we had listened, or if only we are prepared to listen. So let me get to the Ukraine and Russia war. I want to use, as I said, this time available to share some alternative viewpoints. That's the viewpoints that we're not hearing in the mainstream media. And I want to share that with you, and I'm going to ask you just to comment on that. And here's the first point. First point is this war could have been avoided if only we had listened to the voice of Vladimir Putin. I can put in brackets also, make a reference to what we just said about if only we listened to Scott Ritter. If only we had listened to Vladimir Putin, who had for the last 20 years called upon the USA to sit around the table and to discuss Russia's legitimate security concerns. Your view?
100% correct. I mean, the fact is today the world, the Western world, we view Vladimir Putin as a cartoon character. I don't know in South Africa if you ever saw Bullwinkle, the cartoon. Boris and Natasha, the two,
Mm-hmm.
you know, funny in the cartoon, but it represented a grossly oversimplified characterization of Russia and Russians. And we've done the same thing to Putin. We treat him as some sort of godfather type authoritarian. But anybody who studies his rise to power, I mean, I'm not going to bore people with the 90s, but he was literally the accidental president.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't meant to be president. He didn't want to be president. It wasn't what he was seeking. It turned out he was the only honest person in Boris Yeltsin's inner circle that Yeltsin could turn to when it came time to transfer the reins of power. Yeltsin was surrounded by wolves, greedy, uh, corrupt wolves who were coming in to finish off the Russian carcass.
Yeah.
And I think Yeltsin had a moment of clarity and said, no, we need to get out of this, but there's only one person that could do it. And that's the guy who doesn't want the job.
Mm-hmm.
And Putin took the job. And when he took the job, again, he didn't have a vision of anything other than saving Russia from the decade of the 90s. People who study that understand what that was. It was the worst time in Russian history since the end of the Second World War. And Putin was trying to work with the West, literally reaching out and saying, what can we do? You got this expanding NATO thing happening. Why don't you just invite us in? We'll be part of NATO. Then you don't have to expand anymore. Now
Yeah.
we're there. We don't need to fear each other. Oh no, we couldn't do that. And then nobody talks about the Chechen conflict, the role of the CIA and MI6 in transferring Wahhabist ideology into Chechnya for the sole purpose of destabilizing the Russian Federation. The CIA had a master plan of breaking Russia up into its constituent parts to weaken it so Russia could never again rise up to the level of the Soviet Union. And Putin is aware of this, and he's still willing to work with the West, saying, "Okay, we know what you're trying to do, but let's work together." No one did it, and you see the frustration first manifested itself in April 2005 when he gave a speech to the Federal Council, and that's the one that gets misquoted. That's the speech where he said that the one of the greatest geopolitical disasters of the last century was the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, he said one of. He didn't say the, but everybody says the Soviet, boom, as if Putin is saying, woe is me. But then they never mentioned the next part, which is because overnight tens of millions of Russians found themselves homeless, without a home, with no one to care for them. that was the catastrophe. It wasn't the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was the human cost of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it was his mission to take care of the Russian people, the Russian nation. In 2007, he had enough. The West wasn't going to cooperate, wasn't going to work in a collegial fashion. And that's when he called out the West at the Munich Security Conference. One of the greatest pieces of geopolitical rhetoric in modern age. And most Americans ignore it, most Westerners ignore it. It's genius, not just his statement, but the question and answer period where he literally made the Western members in the audience twitch uncomfortably in their seats. Watching John McCain and John Kerry stare into the distance it's beautiful. But then you felt, everything he warned about there became true. 2008, the invitation to Ukraine and Georgia by NATO to join. The memorandum written in February 2009 by William Burns, a name familiar today because he's the director of the CIA. At the time, he was the U.S. ambassador to Russia. The title of this memorandum was "Niet means Niet." Let me just point one thing out. The only reason why we know about this memorandum is because of a man named Julian Assange, who's sitting in prison today for daring to tell the world, release information to the world about the reality of what's going on. So the only reason why people are going to know about what I'm about to say isn't because Scott Ritter's a wonderful researcher and or the State Department is honest. It's because Julian Assange released documents about U.S. diplomacy that the U.S. State Department doesn't want anybody to know about.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why is because William Burns in this memorandum said, "Niet means niet, no means no." When the Russians say that Ukraine is a red line, they mean it. And he talked about the consequences, and I'll just boil it down. If the United States continues to pursue the expansion of NATO to include Ukraine, then Russia will have no choice but to engage in military action, and Ukraine will lose, at a minimum, the Donbass and Crimea. February 2009, he wrote this. February 2009, he put it on the table and he said, this is what's at stake here. These are the consequences.
Yeah.
We ignored him. We ignored everything. We pushed. Putin tried to make peace. We orchestrated a coup in Kiev in February 2014. I know people take contention with that. I have no use for those people who say it wasn't a coup. Then you don't know anything about research, history, common sense, logic. It was a coup d'etat undertaken by the West. One has to listen to, again, things they don't want us to hear, but they're there. Victoria Nuland's intercepted conversation with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Listen to how, and this is before Viktor Yanukovych fled. While he's still president, they're talking about who is going to be the future leaders of Ukraine, because that was the sole purpose of Maidan, a violent coup d'etat that killed scores of people to put in place this ultra-nationalist group of neo-Nazi worshiping, Stepan Bandera embracing thugs who then turned their genocidal mindset against the Russians of East Ukraine.
Yeah.
What happened? Crimea was taken by the Russians and to protect the Russian interests. William Burns warned us about that. And then the Donbass rose up and said, no, we don't support the coup. We support the former legitimate president to have a near civil war. From that point on, Vladimir Putin, now if Vladimir Putin was the evil man that they say he was, he would have absorbed the Donbass immediately when they asked for independence. But Putin was pushing for the territorial integrity of Ukraine to be respected.
Yeah.
He asked for the Minsk I Accords. That didn't happen. Minsk II came in. Germany, France, claimed to be part of this. The United States claimed they wanted to support it. Turns out it was a sham. But it wasn't a sham because Russia was playing a game. It was a sham because everybody else was playing a game. Putin was seeking a diplomatic solution from day one. Up until the very end, December of last year, he put draft treaties in the hands of NATO and the United States saying, please, please, please don't do what you're about to do. Yep. We need peace. Here is a European security framework. Don't ignore us. Talk to us. I know you're not going to be happy what's in the document. That's okay. Sit down at the table. Let's talk about this. Let's take this seriously. Let's make sure we exhaust every venue possible short of war before war becomes the only option available. And the United States didn't believe him, thought he was bluffing, said, no, we're going to sanction you. You must be afraid. Vladimir Putin said, Well, I have no choice. We get a special military operation, and the rest is history. People like to write the history beginning on February 24th.
Yep.
The Russian troops, brutal aggression, unprovoked aggression. Man, if you write that, that means you're ignorant about everything I just said. The bottom line is Russia is the only party that sought to avoid conflict. We now know that Germany, France, the United States, and Ukraine, and from 2014 on, were looking for a conflict, planning for a conflict, using diplomacy not as a vehicle of resolving problems, but buying time to build up military capability so there could be a war. Gosh, wait, what did Putin say? Article 51, United Nations Charter, collective self-defense, preemptive collective self-defense. Everything Putin says is 100% legally correct. We know this. And it's not because we know this because Scott Ritter is, providing unique geopolitical analysis. We know it because the West is admitting this now. Yeah. I mean, Petro Poroshenko's out there saying it was a sham. Angela Merkel just gave an interview where she said, yeah, we were just buying time to build up the military. It's there. Yep. We admit our failures. So yeah, Vladimir Putin, if the world had just listened to Vladimir Putin, there wouldn't be a war. Not only that, there would be European security. I just ask all Europeans to reflect on their current state of affairs and understand none of this had to be. None of this had to be.
Let me. You've partly already covered the question I wanted to ask you, and the second point I was going to make is that contrary to what is reported by the mainstream media, there is, to my mind, no single proof, no sign, no statement ever made by Putin that he ever suggested to create a greater Russia on the one hand, or where he in fact did not respect Ukraine's sovereignty. Absolutely.
Just the opposite. Just the opposite.
And in fact, if I may say so, it was not even his intention to take the eastern parts of the country. That
even close.
That he wanted to stay within the Minsk agreement in terms of that.
But even before 2014, Russians and let's just be frank, they weren't happy about this. Because Putin has a point. Creation of Ukraine, the state of Ukraine, it's an artificial entity cobbled together, through the by the history. What is Western Ukraine? Up until 1939, it was Poland. Eastern Ukraine, it was Russia. Crimea was Russia. This little rump state in the middle called Ukraine was nothing. It was fought over by people. But the Soviet Union, under Lenin, his nationalist policy, created something called Ukraine. And then it grew and it had pieces added to it over time. In the 50s, Crimea was attached to it, even though it's predominantly Russian. But they, the same thing with the Donbass to give it economic viability. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, many Russians were saying, we're not happy about what's going on in Ukraine because that is Russia. There's a huge chunk of Russia that's now part of a foreign country, and we're not happy about it. But the decision was made to respect that, to say, no, Ukraine is a nation. We're not happy. We're going to respect these borders. And Putin, engaged in similar dialogue with Ukraine, respecting the territorial integrity of Crimea, the eastern Donbass. Crimea, the hand was forced when the nationalists started to make a move on Sevastopol. The Russians said, no, we're not playing that game. Boom, took it in. We can talk about international law and all that. I'm sorry, hundreds of years of Russian history just aren't going to let some Western Ukrainian neo-Nazi nationalists roam into Crimea. The Russians probably don't have international law on their side when it comes to Crimea, but they're on the right side of history. Because Crimea is unique. But Eastern, you can make the same case for Eastern Ukraine, that it's unique, that it's Russian, but the Russian government did not take the easy way. I mean, the easy way would have been as soon as the Donbass said we're independent, to recognize the independence of 2014, flood the zone with Russian troops, and resolve that issue right then. They didn't do that.
Yeah.
So when people talk about Novaya Russia, that Putin always wanted no, Putin always recognized the historical reality of Novaya Russia, but Putin also recognized that when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was this reality called the Ukrainian-Russian border, and he bent over backwards to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine, denying the Donbass. And You want to talk about some frustrated people? Yes, today the people of the Donbass are Russian citizens, but they were sitting there going, for 8 years we asked for this and you didn't give it to us.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of anger and resentment there because of the delay. But Putin's response, the Russian government's response, is because you're Ukrainian. The border is here. So any notion that this was some grand scheme that Putin's cooking up to seize eastern Ukraine and create Novorossiya is absurd. Now that Ukraine, and I get in trouble when I say this, but when you install a Nazi government and you start behaving like Nazis, you sort of lose your right to claim territorial sovereignty. I'm sorry, you don't have a right to exist as a nation. And the Russians are basically saying that okay, you want to play the game called treat Russian citizens, or the Russian nationals, ethnic Russians, as subhumans. You want to murder them. You want to rape them. You want to torture them. No, we're not going to let that happen. Go back to 2005, the speech. Overnight, tens of millions of Russians were made homeless. My job as the Russian president is to care for these people. And so Vladimir Putin is assuming the mantle that he defined in 2005 to take care of the ethnic Russian people when the world is turning their back on genocidal policies. Again, people, please take the laws that have been proposed and passed by the Ukrainian parliament. Wherever it says we ban the Russian language, we ban the Russian culture, we ban the Russian religion, we ban this, remove the word Russian, insert the word Jew, and you have Germany, 1930, and we all agree that that should never happen again, but it's happening right now in Ukraine, funded, supported by the West. Vladimir Putin, history will hopefully record that he was the one adult in the room who had the courage to stand up in the face of this wanton, re-embrace of the very ideology that, and I can say our in this case because South Africans fought in that war, the war against Nazi fascism, the war against Nazi Germany. We at the time thought it was a good idea to stamp that ideology out, and yet we're sitting here allowing it to fester and grow in Ukraine today. Vladimir Putin is not, and I thank him for that.
Yeah. In fact, if I recall correctly, even the United States Congress has labeled groups like Azov and these new nationalist groups as, in fact, terrorist organizations. Am I correct in saying that, or not allowing funding to them, or something like that?
Correct. From 2015 on until this year, the Congress has sought an amendment to the Department of Defense authorization bill, sending money to Ukraine, where they have said that U.S. taxpayer money cannot be used to train the Azov battalion because it is a, quote, white supremacist group with neo-Nazi affiliations. Then in 2019, they wrote a letter to then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, where they said, why aren't you designating this white supremacist neo-Nazi group as a foreign terrorist organization? We hadn't designated them, but the Congress was demanding why that hasn't been done. But now today, all those people who signed those letters today are inviting the Azov people into Congress, treating them as heroes, allowing them in the people's house to auction off Nazi memorabilia, the patches with the hateful symbols, to raise money for their hateful cause. America has literally lost track. We have jumped the tracks and we're heading down a path that I don't recognize as something reflecting the values of my country. I have an uncle that went across the beach in Normandy.
Yeah.
A couple of days afterwards, so he wasn't on the assault, but he participated in the drive through France. His company got eviscerated in Belgium. When we took him to visit that battlefield, he fell to his knees and couldn't talk. He was crying so hard, and he was a grown man at the time. And our whole nation made that sacrifice. Yeah. South Africa made that sacrifice. Great Britain made that sacrifice. The Soviet Union made that 27 million lives lost fighting this hateful ideology. Yeah. And yet we're sitting there letting them into Congress today. I don't understand it. It's incomprehensible to me.
Yeah. Well, let's summarize where we are now, and in terms of the view of the media, the story that we're being fed every day. We're also being fed the idea that Putin's military, he overestimated the might of his own military. He recently visited with the mothers of the soldiers, and he made the observation to the mothers of the soldiers that this is not a war of choice. It was not his choice to undertake this war. And the second thing that he also said to them, in fact, if he had made a mistake, the mistake that he had made was to wait so long before he entered. He made that admission. How do you view that? How do you view that statement by him? Because we also here, as I said, in our papers, we read every day about the defeat of the soldiers, Russian soldiers running with their tails between their legs, the Ukrainian soldiers bravely winning this war, and of course, the facts on the ground, and you've told us that many times, is in fact not so. But is Putin right if he when he said to the mothers that I should have entered earlier?
Well, first of all, I believe he's right. But in order for me to give, the definitive answer because some people will say, well, that's just a political statement made by a politician to score points in front of grieving mothers. But let me put it this way. I have worked with the Russian Foreign Ministry. I know some of their people personally who are, back when I was a weapons inspector, they were mid-level people, except for Lavrov, who was the ambassador at the time. Lavrov is ageless, apparently. But their foreign ministry is some of the most professional diplomats in the world. Very well prepared, very well briefed. Nothing gets by them. Nothing gets by them. And I imagine that Putin was being briefed repeatedly by the foreign ministry about the lack of sincerity on the part of Germany, France, the United States when it comes to implementation of the Minsk Accords. And that at that time, from 2015 on, there were people saying that they will never, this is my guess, I'm not saying I know this is my guess, that there are people saying they will never implement it, they never mean to implement it, they're building up their power, we need to go in, we need to act. And Putin said, no, we're going to let diplomacy work its way out. I think that's what he's alluding to, the fact that he was continuously briefed about the inevitability of the collapse of diplomacy, that it wasn't sincere, about the inevitability of a military outcome, and that the longer Russia waits, the stronger Ukraine will get. I mean, when you have a U.S. permanent military training facility, NATO/U.S. training facility in Western Ukraine, cranking out one NATO trained and equipped battalion every 55 days. And they do that for 7 straight years. That's a lot of battalions.
Yeah.
And so every 55-day period that went by, the Ukrainians got that much more stronger. And people are saying, this is the inevitability, boss. And I think that's what Putin is reflecting on, that, this happened. But here's the other thing, too. This wasn't a war when it started. And that's something that I don't think the West can get their minds wrapped around. I, as somebody who's studied Russia extensively and know Russians, and I like to believe I have an insight into how they think and why they think. I wasn't prepared for the special military operation, this non-war war, because it's not a war. I've been to war. when I go to war, I kill people. Gladly slaughter them. Don't take any mercy on it. If they put their hands up, they're prisoners. We take care of them. You don't put your hands up, you will die. You will die violently. It's not a fair fight. We're going to roll in. If you're in trenches resisting us, bring in the bulldozers, and we shove dirt on the trenches, and we just smother you. If you're in a tunnel resisting, I don't come in and fight you hand to hand. I pull back and throw a thermobaric weapon in there. Boom, stuck the lung. I kill you. That's how war is. The Russians didn't do that. They came in, first of all, with insufficient manpower. They didn't mobilize. They took peacetime manning, brought them to the border, and then told the troops, just go in, go in. We have assurances from our intelligence service. I think the history will show that there was a huge intelligence failure on the part of the Russians that said, we've been told by our sources that the Ukrainian military is going to remain in barracks and that the civilian leadership is going to welcome you in and there won't be resistance. So they told the troops, just go, go, go. And they just went. They didn't care about left or right security. They didn't care about rear security. And they rolled into ambushes. In some areas, like in the south, in Kherson, Zaporizhia, they were able to capture a lot of territory quickly because apparently the intelligence services were right. But in the north, They got ambushed.
Yeah.
And you've seen the videos, entire columns trashed. And I'll tell you what, all you chairborne heroes out there, Russians running with their tail between their legs. Hey, you go climbing a 2.5-ton truck, go rolling through, and randomly I'm going to ambush you and slaughter your friends. And I want to see what you do, hero. Are you going to stand bravely and suddenly have all the courage in the world? Or are you going to tuck tail and run, as any human does when they're confronted with that?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. We don't understand why we don't understand the mentality. Why would Russia do this? Because Russia doesn't want to go to war with Ukraine. Ukraine is Russia. Remember, I tell you that the way the history is, the Russians don't view Ukraine as this foreign land. They don't view the Ukrainians as foreigners. They view them, all the Russian military officers of my age went to school with these guys.
Yep.
They all went to academy together. They were in the Soviet military. They're drinking buddies. They married sisters, cousins. They are family. You scratch a Russian, you get a Ukrainian. You scratch a Ukrainian, you get a Russian. And now you want them to go to war with each other? It's insane. So the Russians came in with their special military operation, but it turned out to be a war because Ukrainian military had been training for 7 years to fight the Russians.
Yeah.
The West knew this. It wasn't like the United States and Germany and France and NATO are going, oh my, the Russians are coming in. They'd been preparing for it. There were ambushes waiting for them. And now the Russians had to regroup. And that regrouping, we in the West said, oh, they're weak. They're failing. They don't know how to fight, et cetera. Well, I'll tell you what, they don't know how to fight. Then why are the casualty ratios the way they are? And, in the West, don't listen to the Ukrainian casualties. First of all, we know that there's Ukrainian mothers, wives, and sisters who have signed a petition. There's 320,000 Ukrainians unaccounted for. Unaccounted for. That's missing in action. They're dead. They are dead. They are gone forever. They're not coming back. And this is above and beyond I think the figure now is somewhere around 80,000 confirmed dead. That's 400,000 dead. Now we put on that the wounded. There's around 700,000 Ukrainian casualties today, and it's getting worse. Bakhmut is being surrounded. There's going to be tens of thousands more dead, wounded. What have the Russians suffered? Maybe 80,000 casualties total. That's dead and wounded. That's a lot, an awful lot. But you compare 80,000 with 700,000, that's it's nearly a 10-to-1 casualty ratio. And I'm telling you right now, no army loses a war when they are on the favorable end of a 10-to-1 casualty ratio. Russia's not losing this war. And here's the other thing I'll tell people, the Russians, right? They got 10 to 15 division equivalents showing up in December and January. Division equivalents. That's 220,000 men showing up on the front line. Ukraine's got nothing. So if you think Russia's losing this war, go smoke dope, man, because that's about the only thing that's going to make your brain work. Russia's winning this war decisively because Russia has transitioned. They still call it the special military operation, but they've transitioned to war.
Scott, just for a moment, let's just go back to the name Putin gave this operation, the special military operation. He only put in, I think, something like 200,000 men. There's some people that say that he was hoping, it's been suggested, that the operation will kind of shake up the world and force America into dialogue with the Russians.
No military planner is going to invade a nation of 44 million people, 200,000 troops.
Exactly.
It just isn't sound planning if you're seeking to fight a war. But if you were seeking sort of a shock and awe kind of rapid advance, the inevitability of defeat, assurances of non-resistance, and then hopefully the collapse of the government, replacing with a new government. We don't know what the Russians had in store because they're being very reticent about this thing. So we're compelled to do some analysis. But the goal was to get a quick and easy victory in Ukraine that would secure the Donbass, which the promise that Putin made about the Russian people protecting them, secure Crimea, and get a neutral Ukraine and do it so impressively that NATO said, wow, we don't want to take on the Russians. We would prefer this new European security framework. I still think that's the Russian objective. They haven't changed their objectives. It's just that the price that's going to be paid is by all parties is far greater.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk for a moment about Zelensky, the very popular actor that became a president, very little political experience. He seems hell-bent to fight this fight. In fact, I think he's following Lindsey Graham's words that they will fight to the last standing man, Ukrainian man. Here's my question. Is Zelensky the great warrior that we in the Western media have made him out to be? Is he a true statesman? Is he the Churchill of Ukraine? Or is he actually just a fool caught between his own extreme right, that's the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazis, the nationalists, etc., on the one hand, and on the other hand, US hegemony, the political, economic, and military predominance of the United States of America, and the USA's persistence and insistence to keep that going. Is he balancing between these two forces?
I'm never going to denigrate the intelligence of Volodymyr Zelensky. He's a lawyer, so obviously he has enough innate intelligence to graduate law school. But let's just be clear who he was. He was a comedian who played a president on a wildly popular Ukrainian TV show, Servant of the People. I've seen it. He's funny. It's a funny show. Very illuminating about the corruption that's inherent throughout Ukraine. But what happened was Ukrainian politics is so messed up that Petro Poroshenko, who was the incumbent president running for re-election, was so unpopular that the oligarchs who were opposed to Poroshenko, who was himself an oligarch, the chocolate man, said, "No, we're going to put this actor who played a president before the Ukrainian people and convince him that he can be president." Now, when you read into the campaign of Zelensky, it was a horrible campaign. I mean, he's horribly unqualified. His answers to any question were just ridiculous, shallow. But the Ukrainian people weren't into substance; they were into superficiality. Poroshenko was so reviled that they picked this guy to be the breath of fresh air. He failed immediately. He was incapable of governing. He was elected with, I believe, 78% popular vote. Within less than a year, that number had plummeted to under 25%. The man started suppressing free speech, closing down opposition media. He was under pressure from the right wing. He was told, if you implement Minsk, you will be hung by the neck until you're dead. And it's not me making this up. They videotape them saying it. They have the head of, I forget what the movement was, C-19 or something like that. They know, we told them, if you sign it, we'll hang you. You'll die right here. Wow, in America, if you threaten the president like that, the Secret Service will swarm your house and take you away, and you will not be in society for many, many years. Rightfully so. But no, they can get away with that because that's the nature of the Ukrainian regime. This is a man who stumbled into this conflict. He's scared. He's intimidated. He's a little child looking for handouts, begging, and his masters have played him like a fiddle. Is he the great Churchillian figure? One of the quotes, just to answer that question briefly, one of the quotes that established his stature as this great military man wearing his olive green tactical shirts because he's such a fighter. He hasn't fought in his life. But there was when someone said, maybe you need to leave, we can get you out of Kiev. And he said, I don't need a ride. I need ammunition.
Yeah.
He never said it. Never said it. We now know that we knew at the time because I was sitting there going, okay, that's a heck of a quote, but where'd it come from? An unnamed U.S. intelligence official at the U.S. Embassy says that this is what Zelensky said. And now the U.S. government straight up admits Zelensky never said it. We wrote it. We released it. That's Zelensky in a nutshell. He's manufactured. Every speech he gives, every quote he gives, everything. When he spoke to the British Parliament, he read a speech written by his MI6 handlers about, which invoked Churchillian type phraseology. He didn't come up with that. When he spoke to U.S. Congress, he talked about, American history and the founding fathers. He didn't come up. That was written by his CIA handlers. This man is purely a manufactured tool of the West. And watch how quick the West dumps him. And he's on the way out right now. He is inconvenient at the moment. People don't like him anymore. He's not he's a beggar. He's whining. He's pleading for more money. And I think you're going to see he's going to be pushed out, and probably his chief of staff of the military is going to take his place. But Zelensky's not Churchill. Zelensky's a tool. He's a puppet. That's it.
Yeah. Let me talk about the here and now and the situation on the ground. It's winter in Europe, as you know, winter in Ukraine. Putin's soldiers are mobilized, they trained, ready to move, are on the move. 40% of the Ukraine is without electricity. Some say that Europe will face within the next month or two the possibility of a stream of refugees. Some people say 3, 5, up to 8 million refugees. The European economy is shaky, to say the least. There are signs of war fatigue, that there are cracks in NATO. Putin doesn't trust the West. Here's my question. As you see the situation on the ground right now, once again, is there überhaupt at all any chance whatsoever that the Ukrainians can, in some way or another form, win this war as the media seems to insist they must? Any chance? I'm putting it in quite the extreme to you now, I guess.
Well, let me put it this way. There's no such thing as 100%. Vladimir Putin could have a heart attack today, fall down dead. And then the Russians go into because I don't think he has a well thought out succession. So there could be infighting in Russia, and next thing you know, Russia's lost focus and can't. You come up with any scenario. But if I were in Vegas, I would never bet against Russia losing this war, ever. You could offer me whatever odds you wanted. I would never bet against Russia losing this war. Russia will not lose this conflict. The question now is, how do you define victory? Because it's no longer this war will end on Russia's terms. There will be no negotiated settlement. Ukraine doesn't have any cards to play. The poker game's over. It closed on April 1st in Istanbul, when Ukraine could have got a deal at that time. Putin was looking for a way out because his gambit failed. And he was sitting there saying, okay, let's close this thing down. Let's keep Donbass, Crimea. But, we're done with this. We tried the quick and easy thing. It didn't work. We only have 200,000 troops. We're not ready. Ukraine withdrew under pressure from the West. It was Boris Johnson that came in and said, no deal.
Yeah.
And now the Russians have sacrificed a lot, and they've mobilized, and this will end on Russia's terms. The only negotiation will resemble that which took place in Tokyo Bay in September 1945, when the Japanese had to stand before a table with the American conquerors and sign the terms dictated by the United States. Russia will dictate terms. So it's up to Russia what Russia wants out of this. I can't sit here and say with full confidence what I know. What Russia says it wants. It wants demilitarization. That means that all NATO influence is eliminated from the Ukrainian military. Since the Ukrainian military is a de facto proxy of NATO today, it means the total destruction of the Ukrainian military.
Yeah.
So either Russia is going to kill them all, and Russia is prepared to do so now. There's no more soft glove approach. The Russians are in the business of killing Ukrainians, and business is good. They're slaughtering them on the front, and they're going to kill them more. 10 to 15 divisions are showing up very soon. Ukraine's got nothing to respond. Russia is taking out at will. Russia can attack Ukraine top to bottom, left to right at will. There is no air defense system in Ukraine worthy of the name. It's, they shoot down 1 or 2 missiles, everything else gets hit, and Russia can do whatever it wants in Ukraine right now in terms of taking out critical infrastructure. The key here for Russia is how to manage, because let me put this too. Europe and the United States sought to impose massive sanctions on Russia. Mm-hmm. Sanctions that weren't designed to hurt Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs and all that. Yes, they were. Sanctions designed to hurt the Russian people, to starve the Russian people. to have their livelihoods eliminated through economic collapse, to bring about domestic calamity in Russia. So if you're a Russian citizen, you need to wake up to this reality that the West is not this warm and fuzzy thing. It is a brutal, thuggish entity that sought to bring harm to you, to deny your ability to raise your children, deny your ability to have a job, deny your ability to have health care, pension, everything. They wanted to crush Russia. So beware the West, because soon the only hope you have is Russian goodwill, because your economy is going down. It's collapsing, not because of anything Russia did, because of what you did, what we did in seeking to isolate Russia, sanction Russia. It has failed. Russia has emerged with a very solid economy while Europe is suffering, and Europe's going to suffer egregiously. So Russia is going to play whatever cards they can, up to and including, because there's a reason behind the madness. It's not just about taking out electric power grids to curtail the movement of military forces and command and control. This is about destroying a nation. Russia isn't in the business of saving Ukraine anymore. Russia's in the business of destroying Ukraine and in the process bringing harm to Europe. Russia will, I believe, generate a economic emergency, humanitarian emergency in Ukraine that requires millions of people to flee for their lives. If they stay in their frozen cities, they will die. There will be no food, no water, no electricity, no healthcare, nothing. This is a tragedy, but the West brought it on themselves. And now millions of people are going to flee to the West, and the West is going to have to deal with that problem. Yeah. And suddenly, when this is all said and done, not only will the Russians have destroyed the Ukrainian military, there's also denazification, by the way, which everybody poo-poos in the West. There is a Nazi problem in Ukraine. There won't be when Russia finishes. That is pretty much a guarantee. If you don't understand Russia and how much they hate Nazi ideology and how sickened they are that it has reborn itself rebirthed itself in Ukraine under Western protection. If you think that Stepan Bandera Avenue is still going to be Stepan Bandera Avenue when this is done, if you think there's going to be monuments to Stepan Bandera in Lvov in Western Ukraine, you don't know Russia. Russia will denazify Ukraine, and the cost of that denazification will be horrific. The gloves are off. Russia's not committing war crimes. Everybody's going, this is a war crime. Really? Take a look at what the United States did to Iraq in 1991. I was a part of that. We took out their infrastructure. We took out their electric. We took out their water. We took out it because it's all dual use. Look what we did to Serbia. We shut the lights out in Serbia in 1999. NATO did. Russia's just doing it better. They're doing it bigger. And it should scare the hell out of the West. Yeah. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word on radio, so I apologize. But it should scare the heck out of Europe, because I think Europe needs to wake up that they're, for the grace of God, go us. Meaning, you want to fight with Russia. This is what war is about, ladies and gentlemen. Europe forgot that. Europe forgot what it's like to have cities torn apart, populations dislocated, death and suffering on a large scale, economies malfunctioning. Welcome to war, Europe. You wanted it, you got it, you pay the price, and ain't no Russian shedding a tear for you. But you know what the sad thing is? Russians are crying for them, because Russians are good people. Russians are upset about this. This is ripping Russia's soul apart, because they're not the evil, robotic, automaton, Mordor, orc nation that they've been told. This is a nation of deep culture, deep religion. These people are religious, and they take their religion seriously, and they believe in doing good to fellow humans. They don't want to be doing what's happening right now. This war is ripping them apart. But as I said when we at the break, I'm attracted to Rick Atkinson's trilogy, where he talked about the transition of the American draft military from isolationist depression area men who wanted to be at home with their families. Wow. They didn't want to go to war. They didn't believe in this war. And the transition from that into this army of killers, not rapists and murderers, killers who realize the only way you're going home is by killing the Nazis in front of you, and kill them without mercy, slaughter them. And I think the Russian army right now, they've got 300,000 guys mobilized who don't want to go to war. They don't want to go to war, but they are, and they recognize that the quickest path home is by killing every Ukrainian soldier in front of them, slaughtering them. Now, if they put up their hands, they're not going to murder them like the Ukrainians murdered Russian soldiers. They're going to take them prisoner. And they've proven that. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have been taken prisoner, and then they're returned. They have medical care and all this kind of stuff. But this war is going to get ugly, ugly, ugly. And Europe is to blame. America is to blame. No one, this is not Russia's fault. Just because Russia has been compelled to behave in this manner, don't blame Russia. They didn't want this. They didn't want to do this. They sought to avoid this. They were pushed, and they had no choice.
Which brings me to this question. It would appear to me, and I'd like your view on this, that the United States and their allies have kind of dug themselves into a corner here. We use different language at the beginning of this war. Everybody was talking about Putin being in a corner, and one should give Putin an off ramp if you want to get out of this, or that would be the wise thing to do. But it will seem to me that the tide is turning, and I'm not a man who understands much about militaries and the war and all the rest of it. It's just kind of what my logic tells me, that the ship is turning another way. And it seems to me that, as I said, that the US have got itself here into a nasty situation that they have to get out of. My question is, how do they do that? And I guess the question that follows that would be, how would the media spin all of that when we have to face reality, when we have to face the fact that it is not going the way as is portrayed by the media today?
Well, the media, let's start with the media, first of all. The media doesn't exist as legitimate journalism anymore. They're purely a propaganda arm of their respective, national security establishments. And we know this. NBC News has admitted it. The National Security Advisor of the United States brags about how they have declassified intelligence that they know is wrong. They know it's wrong, but they're going to release it selectively to the media to shape perception. So it's all about information warfare. It's all about propaganda. There's no truth. Now, there used to be a time when a journalist would say, no, I'm going to ask a follow-up question to you because I know you're lying. I need the answer. And then the story would be the lie and the cover-up and all this. But the media is now going, oh, okay, you want us to do that? We'll write it down, and then we'll print whatever you want us to print for that purpose. So, what are we asking the media to do? To show principle? There is no journalist worthy of the name. Journalism doesn't exist anymore in America. Not in the mainstream. They're not journalists. They're professional stenographers. So they have no shame. Let's look at Afghanistan. People have forgotten about Afghanistan. It was barely a year and a half ago that NATO and the United States got humiliated in Afghanistan. In the lead up to that, the media published any story they want. You remember the Russian bounties? Mm-hmm. Russians are paying the Taliban to kill Americans. Never did. Never going to happen. No. Never. No. But they published it. They ran with it. And then we had the thing. We will never leave Afghanistan. We will stay here as long as it takes for the evil scourge of Al Qaeda to be. Suddenly we're out of Afghanistan. And how did we leave? America left with its tail between its legs. The humiliation of the Kabul airport was, just for an American to watch that unroll, it was one of the saddest moments. Not only for the tragedy of the Afghan people whom we had lied to for 20 years, and we abandoned them now because we abandoned everybody. Europe, that's a big hint. We will abandon you. We are abandoning you. You're not our friends. But what did we do to NATO? We didn't even coordinate with NATO. It was like, hey, we're gone. You guys got to figure out how to get out yourself. And NATO now had bought into this whole thing about post 9/11 Afghanistan, national reconstruction, supporting the war on terror. Now they had to flee after spending billions of their own dollars, thousands of lives wounded and dead. And now they went back without even so much as hey, we're sorry from America. And now America's led them down the same path in Ukraine. The media will do whatever the governments tell them to do. And the governments will, let me put it this way, neither Europe nor the United States is going to go to war in Ukraine against Russia. They're doing everything short of war, but there will be no NATO conflict in Ukraine because they know what the consequences will be. Ultimately, as I said, this war ends with the Russians dictating the terms of surrender to Ukraine, period. and the United States and NATO are going to have to accept it. Now they'll spin it, they'll pull back, they'll draw a line, and then they're going to spin it any way they want, and the media will spin it, 400 ways from Sunday. How this was this, that, and the other thing. But at the end of the day, Russia's going to win this war, and the West is going to have to deal with it. All this talk about a diplomatic off ramp right now, I love it when General Mike, we have to give the Russians a diplomatic off ramp. They don't want one. They wanted one back in April. Yep. You shut the door. Russia's not in the diplomatic off ramp game right now. Russia's in, we're going to win this war game. All the dialogue about a diplomatic negotiation is an internal dialogue in the West. It's a conversation they're having with themselves. They're not having it with the Russians, because the Russians, let's just talk about burn rates and replenishment rates. Those are just two things that people, that's all you need to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Ukrainian replenishment rate, right now they got about 20,000 troops in the pipeline, the NATO training pipeline, but there's not enough equipment for those 20,000. Why? Because they had 80,000 troops arrive this summer that were equipped by NATO, but they burned all through them. So their burn rate is much greater than their replenishment rate. So they're getting weaker by the day. Russia, on the other hand, made the decision to withdraw from Kherson in Kharkiv. Why? They didn't want to lose guys that fighting for a piece of dirt. Their burn rate is very low. Their replenishment rate, as I said, 220,000 dudes showing up next month. Their replenishment rate is massive, very low burn rate. And you look at those two, force generating potentials, it's all Russia, all day, all night, all week, all month, all year. NATO doesn't have anything to give because they've given everything. And NATO never went into wartime defense production. It turns out, apparently, for NATO, they didn't realize this, but modern war against Russia requires a lot of artillery. And, the United States had an annual production capacity, I think, of 250,000 artillery shells, 225,000, give or take. But when you're firing 25 to 30,000 rounds a day, you go through a year's production of artillery in a month.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing left because we haven't geared up. The Russians already knew they have high expenditure rates. They're banging out 40, 60,000 rounds a day. They can do that forever. So again, the Russians are getting stronger, and the Ukrainians and NATO are getting weaker. And anybody who thinks that this doesn't end in a decisive Russian victory, again, I'd like to know what you're smoking or drinking, because I want some of that, man.
Yeah. Which, just as I said in my question to you, makes me wonder how the media experts are going to have to spin this. If you're right, if guys like Colonel Douglas McGregor, who I've spoken to, is right, if a guy like Jeffrey Sachs is right, if we listen to you guys, then I wonder, how is America going to actually spin this at the end of the day? Because America would not want to be seen to be losing this war. I want to ask you a last question. And
let me just answer that real quick by just saying, we talked at the beginning about Iraq and WMD. Well, how did we spin the fact that there were no WMD? At some point in time, there will be a committee that'll come together and say, we got it all wrong. And then they draw a line, and then they move on, and the media is supposed to forget all the lies, all the distortion, everything. And that's how they're going to do this. At some point in time, there's going to be a congressional inquiry on how we got it wrong in Ukraine. And some CIA guys are going to say, we got it all wrong. And the media is going to say, mea culpa, it's not our fault because the government got it wrong. We were simply reporting that which the government told us. We shouldn't have believed the government, so on. Then they move on, and they'll do the same thing over again.
Yeah, and it's the same playbook, as you said, indeed. Same thing that we've heard in the run-up to the Iraq war. It's always the same old story. I want to ask you, this is my last question, and here I'm asking you that as an African. I'm not a citizen of the United States of America. I love and respect your people and your country, and I've been there a couple of times and can only say fantastic things about the people of the United States of America. But here is my question. It's maybe a bit of a cheap question. Is America today not responsible for or guilty of killing thousands and thousands of people and destroying the entire infrastructure of Ukraine through its insistence by throwing money, more weapons on this fire, and by insisting that Zelensky and his people must keep up the struggle, continue this war, by not calling for peace talks? America really has, I believe, the key in its hands to stop this war immediately. I'm saying that to you as an American. How do you respond?
I agree 100%. The blood of every Ukrainian, the blood of every Russian, the blood of anybody who died in Ukraine is on America's hands exclusively. This is a war. This is an American war. Russia did everything it could to stop this war. We did everything we could to make sure this war occurred. We were training the Ukrainian military. We knew that the Minsk Accords was a sham. The timing of this war may not have been what optimal for us. But this is a conflict we were preparing for. We were sending hundreds of millions of dollars of lethal munitions to Ukraine for the sole purpose of killing Russian tanks. And then once this war started, we didn't allow for an off ramp. We didn't allow for a Minsk III type deal to be cut in Istanbul. We insisted that the war continue because we believed Russia was weak, and that if we would just pour in tens of millions or billions of dollars of aid into Ukraine, that Russia could be defeated, that their economy would collapse, etc. We got it all wrong, but we still doubled down. America's not very good at saying, "Oops, our mistake." We get on our high and mighty horse and talk. And we lie. We just lie through our teeth. This is a war about democracy. Democracy has nothing to do with this war whatsoever. Zelensky is not democratic. As I said, before the war even started, he was suppressing all of his opposition. But this is a war about freedom. This is about principles. Ukraine was the most corrupt nation in Europe. So this is about principles. Under normal circumstances, Ukraine could never have been considered for EU membership or NATO membership because they simply don't qualify. But we've created this artificial entity called Ukraine that is so far removed from reality as to be almost a joke, which is sort of fitting given who's leading it, a comedian. But it's a tragic joke because it's a joke that has real human costs. As much as I hate the Nazis in Ukraine, I recognize that they are a small minority of the population, that they have been empowered by the West, and then they use threats of violence to insinuate themselves on the Ukrainian government. But the vast majority of the Ukrainian people aren't that way. They're people who want to live their lives just like you and I want to live our lives. They're people with children. Think of what has happened to these people. They've lost everything. Some people have lost their homes. They've lost their lives. At least for the dead people, it's over. But for the survivors, no jobs, no future, an economy that is a literal basket case. They're talking $350 billion of infrastructure damage to date. That number is probably going to go closer to $1 trillion by the time. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to rebuild Ukraine? What is Ukraine going to look like? One minute you were, a citizen of a nation. The next minute you're a citizen of nothing. This is a human tragedy writ large, and all the American, and I get so angry at this, the people who put the Ukrainian flag next to their names on their social media profiles. It's like what I say when I look at people put that little yellow sticker on American cars, support the troops. You don't support the troops. Take the sticker off. You're a liar. Because the only way you support the troops is to go to the VA and deal with the guy who's peeing into a colostomy bag and all that stuff, to feed the guy that has the shakes, to go take care of the guys who are using drugs right now because their brains have been addled by war. If you support the troops, you support them 24/7 throughout the rest of their lives, but you don't. You put that sticker on your car and you feel good. And the same thing with this little Ukrainian flag. Put it up there. I stand with Ukraine. You don't stand with Ukraine, because if you stood with Ukraine, you would never let this happen. You would never allow this to happen to your family members here at home. You'd have stopped this thing a long time ago when you took a look at the cost that was being accrued. You stand with Ukraine, you're slaughtering Ukraine. You're butchering Ukraine. The only friend Ukraine has is Russia, and they don't even know that. They don't recognize that. Russia's the best thing. The only hope for their future is Russia.
Yep. Time for peace talks. And let me just also say in phrasing the question that I had about America's responsibility in this war, if I say there's blood on American hands, I don't mean that in terms of the people of the USA. They are good,
I
decent,
disagree with you.
kind
I
people.
disagree with
Well,
you.
I really put the blame on Washington,
I
on
do
the
too, but
boundaries. As an American, you're allowed to disagree with me
no,
because
but
you
what I mean
know
by that
people
is
better.
we elected these people.
Yeah, yeah.
We elected these people and we kept them in power. We continue to re-elect them. So who's to blame?
Yeah.
You can't, if you elect somebody and they do something and you don't
I
take
get
them
your
out of
point.
office,
Yeah, I
it's
get
on
your
my
point.
hands. The
I get
blood
your
is on
point.
my hands.
Yeah, yeah. From my point of view, I just wanted to say that I personally, you know, so many of us, it's unbelievable. You know, I grew up in a little African village, but I grew up with American music and Elvis Presley and all the rest of it. And I've said that in all my previous interviews with Americans as well. This is really not aimed at the people of America. This is about your policies. Scott, very last question to you. We're running out of time here in a minute or so. I want to know you've expressed your views pretty strongly, and you're all over the place on YouTube. I think it's very brave of you to do that, as was the case in Iraq with the weapons of mass destruction. Are you personally experiencing any kind of pressure on you for expressing your viewpoints? Does it do damage to you and your career in America?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I'm labeled a Russian propagandist, which has shut down three publishing. I'm a writer right now, and so three venues that used to publish me won't publish me anymore because I'm a Russian propagandist, and there's pressure on me on others. Fortunately, the editorial leadership has said no. He's not factually wrong. We just disagree with his politics, but we're going to continue to publish him. But that's it's a significant drop in income generating potential. So that hurt. I'm on a death list, a real one that actually kills people. The Ukrainian government has targeted me for death for using this. And it's a death list funded by the United States government. The billions of dollars that my Congress sends to them is used to put my name on a list that will kill me for the crime of exercising free speech. So and then there's the whole stigma again that the stand with Ukraine thematic has dominated in America, which means anybody who speaks out, factually is immediately derided as a Putin's puppet. You're a shill for Russia. Well, I've done this before though. I mean, I used to be Saddam's shill.
Yeah,
if you remember, I was Saddam's puppet for telling the truth. So I'm proud of being called this because it means that I'm telling the truth. But no, there's a significant price to pay. The America is a consumer nation, and information has become a commodity to be consumed, and there's a monetization of that, and people like myself are being denied the ability to earn a living. Expressing. So yeah, there's a little, but the one thing that's not happening so far is there's no, standard issue boots kicking down my door, to paraphrase Pink Floyd. The U.S. government, isn't they are. I mean, I write for RT. That's one of the outlets that I write for, Russia Today, and because of sanctions, it's impossible to get paid. It's very difficult. So they are constraining and restricting that potential. But it is what it is. Thank God I'm an American. Thank God I have a First Amendment right that I can exercise. I can't say without consequence. I am worried about the level of political violence in America. Just 60 miles down the road in Ellenville, New York, there's a Heroes Park where they have the statue of Stepan Bandera, the Ukrainian nationalist movement in America worships this man. Every summer they have children camps where they indoctrinate them here in America on the ideology of Bandera. And when the U.S. government funds a Ukrainian hit list that targets me for death for speaking out, I'm very worried that some of these fanatics down there will say, wait a minute, they got a target on his back. No one's saying stop. Maybe we're given the green light to do something. That's the one thing that I can't say I'm afraid because, no, but it's in the back of my head, not about me per se. I mean, God, you want to take out a 61-year-old arthritic man? Have at it. I'll still kick your butt. But don't hurt my family. Don't hurt my friends. That's what I'm worried about. Not me, but people close to me.
Scott, I have to, unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to really thank you for this interview, and I hope that we will have the chance sometime in the future to actually revisit the stuff that we have just talked about today. From my side, I really want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and your thoughts with me today. And I truly hope that we'll meet again. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, and we will meet again.